So I'm sitting here listening to Car Talk and thinking about Jeremy Clarkson, the host of the all male macho drive show, and listening to Car Talk, which is in many ways, in some ways, you could say an American version of the car show, the nationally syndicated show that gets viewers to know about their vehicles. Now, the formats are very, very different, so I'm not really comparing them in that way, but it is to say that Click and Clack of Car Talk, of NPR's Car Talk, that I've listened to for years, and this means this probably goes back to the 80s. I've just listened to one of their recent shows on the best of their shows since they retired their show a few years ago. And it was interesting to listen to how differently they regarded their callers based on gender. Now, this show was fascinating in the respect that they opened the show with reporting on an experiment about gender in the car repair industry. They said that they sent out two different car owners who had unplugged one of the lights to one of the indicators, something very simple, and they went out 10 times to 10 different, car repair men, and they got the responses and the actual quotes for the repair. And then, shortly thereafter, they sent out a man with the same vehicle, with the same problem. And in many cases, he was not charged for the repair at all, where she had been quoted hundreds of dollars. So in a very quantifiable way, you could see that gender costs. You could see that implicit bias. And even, of course, the woman was propositioned by one of the repairmen. So there's that, when we talk about gender in our everyday lives. But then the rest of the show proceeds in the normative way that I think is reminiscent of what made Jeremy Clarkson so famous when it comes to how he regards the car industry. It's a man's world and women are interlocutors. They're just sort of passing through, passing by. And Click and Clack in this episode, they had several women callers, and so it was a man caller, a woman caller, and you could literally hear, one woman caller, "Oh, honey, you're so cute. You don't know anything about cars. We could tell you anything." Literally, they said, "Oh, and you'd believe us." Ha 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 ha. They derided her character, just made fun of everything, and she was calling in saying, "I'm really calling in distress because I don't want my car to stall when I'm somewhere and can't get anywhere." And they just make such light of it and tell her that the ultimate solution is to give her boyfriend an ultimatum that he must sell the car. I won't, stay with you if you don't get rid of this car, kind of thing. And better now, they said, but if you get him to sell the car, then you can control him for the rest of his life. And this is they say this with all this laughter, and so you actually don't even know if they're really joking. In that kind of valley, I'm not really owning these words, but I'm saying these things. So I listened to this and I thought, wow, and they just reported about gender bias and they're expressing this kind of gender bias. But let me just see, this was one caller who admittedly knew very little about cars. So the next caller was a guy and he, called in, didactically gave his stats. I know, my car's year, make, color, mileage, everything. And then they proceeded to have a talk amongst equals. You can do this, you can do this. Oh, that, the guy laughed at himself, self-deprecating and all this kind of jolly, but, fraternity between them. And that was that. Then another woman called in. Interestingly, she knew what she was talking about as well. But the first thing they did is not even, let her talk about the car. They started talking about, oh, your name is so funny, And then they asked her some details of the car, and she knew exactly how to describe in a very didactic manner, what's going on with her car. And after she does this, what do you study? What are you doing? Where are you? Why? Oh, and sort of denigrating her character in ways that, of course, they hadn't done with the man, but they had done with the other woman caller. And so you saw this pattern over and over and over and over again. Told the women, don't worry about it. There's nothing you can do about it. If you go to a repair shop, tell them this, this, and this, but ultimately, you're helpless. And that they continue this narrative is where I think implicit bias creeps in our daily lives. Because we see this. I mean, these shows are instructive, and I'm not sort of pointing out these are sexist men to say that these are the only sexist men. But I am pointing this out to say that, of course, as media and mass media, and I'm a listener who's listened to NPR for, over 30 years now, They're where we're socialized in how to think about, talk, see, interact, particularly when it comes to difference. So, we hear the camaraderie amongst the guys talking about the cars, but we also hear the alienation, the ways that they alienated the woman callers, the ways that they denigrated their characters, specifically, laughed at them, not with them. Um, and the women who called in, it was a shame because they said, actually, I need my help. I don't want to get stuck somewhere and my car let me down. And all these guys could do was laugh at them at best, in a very fatherly, oh, I'll help you out, or I'll, help you pass it to the next guy in your life to deal with the problem. But ultimately, there's nothing you can do about it, little girl. And it's difficult for us to say that we don't experience these forms of sexism in our own daily lives. I mean, certainly in our families where we would learn these sorts of patterns initially and then, be able to repeat them in our public lives. Well, certainly, you can imagine that we don't say to ourselves, well, I'm sexist and I'm going to go out and be sexist and I'm going to say something sexist and treat women a certain way and treat men a certain way. We don't do that. Of course, we don't do that on a conscious level. In fact, consciously, we would say to ourselves that I'm anti-sexist, that I treat people equally, that I regard people by their character. And I imagine Click and Clack would say the same. And they would say the same to their wives, to their mothers, and their daughters. And yet, we know that sexism persists. We know that women are poorer than men, that women have less economic power than men, that women have less political power than men. We know that women are under threat from men in many parts of the world, in many specific sorts of ways, in every part of the world, you could say. The sexual threat to men. Words like rape, while men can be raped, and it's still, there was a episode of Law and Order Special Victim Unit, which deals with sex crime. And they talked specifically about male rape, and everyone thought it was a joke. And even the guy who was raped didn't even know that he had been raped. And this woman was a serial rapist, raping all these men. And they even had to convince the cops, and shows like this bring this to light. But you seriously think rape itself is something that men do to women to express, to exert, to assert a certain kind of gendered power over women. And that we link ourselves in this thinking. Now, rape is quite extreme. We don't think of ourselves as rapists either. But we link ourselves to the normative ways that sexism is allowed to progress, to go unquestioned, to infiltrate our daily lives. And this is where, it doesn't just become a joke that that women are economically already disenfranchised in the workplace. And then in the consumer marketplace, no, it's not equal either. And looking at cars, and the cars being one of the largest consumer industries, if you can't rely on that, on getting your car repaired and keeping your car healthy, on that being equitable across genders, and you look at other ways that people are, because gender and race and class are always intertwined. But just looking at this one factor, gender, in this instance, you can really see that we must all be quite vigilant when it comes to deconstructing, understanding, talking about, thinking about sexism in our own lives. Because you can bet every single man who made every single decision along all the steps in that experiment, every single car repairman that they encountered, has a mother, probably has a girlfriend or a daughter or a wife or a niece, has females in their lives that they love, that they would protect. And so to think that they would want to protect these people and care for them, and yet perpetuate sexism in other ways is unmentionable, is unfathomable. And yet we do it. And so the only way that we can really remedy this is to forward dialogue.